Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the military sexual trauma breakout session. We have Dr. Audrey Sessions, Julie Borovik, and Kimberly Kordik, who are going to be our presenters for today.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
I will pull up the presentation. And here we go.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for choosing this breakout session. It looked like we were up against COVID, and I'm sure that everyone wants to hear more about that. So my name is Dr. Audrey Sessions-Spezzacatena. I am the MST coordinator here at the Phoenix VA. And also presenting with me is my counterpart from the Northern Arizona VA healthcare system, Julie Borovik. And after we have had a chance to talk about some information more from the Veterans Health Administration side, we have Ms. Kim Kordik, who is from the regional office at Phoenix for Veterans Benefits Administration. So we'll be sure to get to that as well. So today we will be talking to you about military sexual trauma. Ignacio, if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So today we are going to define military sexual trauma. We will talk more about some of the common reactions and diagnoses that are associated with MST, talk about the eligibility and benefits that are available through Veterans Health Administration, and then talk about some other treatments and resources available.
So let's start off with what is MST? So the VA's definition of MST comes from a public law, section 1720D of Title 38 U.S. Code. But what you really need to know, it is sexual assault or repeated, and you can see that's highlighted, the word repeated, and I'll get to that in a minute, threatening sexual harassment that occurred during a veteran's military service. The reason repeated is highlighted is because it's actually being removed from the VA definition, as well as the MST one-time screen that we use here at the VA to identify survivors of sexual trauma or military sexual trauma. And the reason that it's being removed is because VA realizes that it can just be one event of threatening sexual harassment that can be traumatizing to a service member. And so we want to do a little kind of knowledge check as we start here today. And you can put your answers in the chat if you don't mind. Where do you all think that MST can occur? And I'll give you a couple minutes or a couple seconds really to kind of throw some answers in there.
Everywhere?
I love that, absolutely.
Everywhere and anywhere.
Wow, I'm not stumping anybody this morning. Absolutely, it can occur on or off base. It can be while the service member, now veteran, is on or off duty. So absolutely can happen anywhere. Now, does the perpetrator of a MST event also have to be somebody that's serving in the military?
We have no. So far, all no's.
I love it. You're correct. The perpetrator can be absolutely anybody. It can be someone of the same gender or a different gender. It can be a peer or somebody in the service member's chain of command. It can be a civilian. And sometimes people don't know that it can be a spouse or an intimate partner. Now, does MST only happen to women?
Got some more no's.
Boy, these guys are super sharp this morning. And it's only like 9:30. That you're correct. It happens to absolutely everybody. And does the era that the service member served in or the veteran served in matter?
Lots of no's again.
You're correct. Unfortunately, this has happened probably since the beginning of time. So no, the era doesn't matter. Here at the VA, we see veterans who are anywhere between the age of 18 up to, I've even seen people in their 80s. So it can really happen to anybody. And one thing I really like to point out is MST is an experience. It's not a diagnosis. So we don't treat MST at the VA. We treat any diagnoses, symptoms, struggles that someone has in relation to having an MST experience. Next slide, please. So, kind of going with the theme is, what is MST? It really is any form of sexual activity in which someone is involved against his, her, or their will. So, somebody can be physically forced into participating. They can be unable to consent due to being intoxicated or unconscious, or pressured into sexual activities. And this can come with threats of consequences or promises of reward. I think there's a myth out there that I come across a lot, that men cannot be raped or sexually assaulted. And I think people equate rape or sexual assault with strength, but there are many forms. For example, withholding a promotion or leave can be a form of manipulation or coercion to get a service member to engage in unwanted sexual activities. Remember, not all humans are created equal. There will be times when we can't stop somebody from perpetrating violence upon us. And that really goes against that kind of warrior culture that's within our military. So we can look at things like size and strength, but we can also look at the fight, flight, and freeze response, being outnumbered. It has nothing to do with masculinity or femininity. It has to do with someone's choice to perpetrate violence. And I always like to make sure that folks are clear. Sexual violence is just that, violence. It has nothing to do with sex or intimacy. Any form of sexual violence is simply about violence, which leads us, oh, and one more thing I always like to say, because somebody complies does not mean that they consent. And that's something that we see showing up in our therapy rooms often, is that confusion about, but I didn't do anything. So that's going to lead us to our first poll question, and that should be up here shortly. Now, I appreciate all the participation. And these are anonymous, so no one's going to know what you said.
We have a lot of variability in our answers, isn't like the yes, no questions, right?
Exactly. So, okay, looks like we're slowing down a little bit. So I'll give you the answer as we move on to the next slide. So this is probably one of the most difficult questions that we as MST coordinators get, because oftentimes sexual disclosure, sexual trauma disclosure is the most difficult for people to make, right? And so the most recent statistics that we have are about 1 in 3 women and 1 in 50 men have told, and this is the key word, told, their VHA healthcare provider that they experienced a sexual assault or an MST event. The most recent DOD Sexual Assault Prevention Response Office data shows that it's about, so released in May of 2020, so we should be getting the new report out here shortly. So for fiscal year 19, there was an increase of about 3% of sexual assaults in our active duty service members. And if you are a minority service member, so any form of ethnic, racial, sexual orientation, religious, you're about 17 times more likely to have an MST experience. So although women experience MST at higher rates than men do, statistically, we actually serve a significant amount of men who've had an MST experience because there are so many more men serving in the military than there are women. So approximately 1/3 of the men enrolled for VA care have had an MST experience. And then if we look kind of at our local rates, so I'm at the Navajix, Northern Arizona VA, and Audrey's at the Phoenix VA. So we're a small rural VA. We've had about 802 positive screens for military sexual trauma in fiscal year 2020. And at Phoenix, they had 3,349. And just a few more stats, because I love stats. About 1 in 5 women who experienced sexual harassment were also sexually assaulted. About 66% of service members who reported retaliation after filing a sexual assault complaint were women. Again, another reason why people often don't report. About 73% of the retaliation reports allege that the retaliators were somebody in their chain of command. And about a third of survivors are discharged, typically within 7 months after making a report, and often have harsher discharges than those who leave for other reasons. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Audrey.
Yes, thank you so much, Julie. So let's go ahead and talk now about some of the common mental health and medical diagnoses that we will see related to military sexual trauma. As Julie pointed out earlier, military sexual trauma is not a diagnosis, and it can lead to a number of diagnoses and difficulties. So one thing that I've definitely learned from my work in mental health is that people are incredibly resilient, even after experiencing something incredibly traumatic. So there's not one way that people are going to respond to military sexual trauma. Some people might cope really well and recover without really needing any professional help, maybe just their natural support system. Some people continue to have difficulties, maybe just at times or when there's some kind of reminder or a strong reaction. And then you have people who fall really in between. So there's no right or wrong way to respond to military sexual trauma. What we are seeing is that for those who have experienced maybe more profound trauma or longer term, that might cause some additional problems for them. And they may have a harder time with that. So if we go to the next slide. So we're looking at here some of the mental health diagnoses that are associated with MST. Of course, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is one of the most common ones and probably the one that we hear about the most often, but it's not the only response. In addition to post-traumatic stress, we see a number of issues with depressive disorders, mood disorders, anxiety, substance use, eating disorders, all of these different symptoms or diagnoses that may be associated with that. Next slide, please. Some common mental health symptoms and problems. So even if there's not necessarily a diagnosis that's there, MST and surviving that kind of violence can cause a lot of difficulties for anybody. So some of those might be just emotional difficulties, maybe problems with thoughts, so a hard time concentrating or thinking, maybe suicidal thoughts or behavior. And we see quite often some substance use as well, because people might be trying to cope with these painful memories, painful emotions, and might learn that by engaging in some kind of substance use or other behaviors that temporarily decreases symptoms. But what we know is that just leads to a lot more problems in the long term, right? And the next slide, please. So I am not a medical provider, and I will not pretend that I know and understand fully how all of these different symptoms or problems are associated with MST, but we do know that there's definitely a correlation to these other physical health problems, right? When you think about the human body, we're one, right? It's not like we have our separate mind or separate bodies. So oftentimes we'll see that when people have experienced and survived MST, maybe they're experiencing chronic fatigue or pain. We'll often see GI problems. We'll see weight problems, so maybe obesity or weight loss, maybe resulting from hypothyroidism. And so these are just a few. And then if we look at the next slide, even if it's not necessarily a mental health issue or a medical or physical health issue, these are just some other common symptoms and problems that might be coming up for people. So people are going to, if they're experiencing these difficult reminders or these intrusive thoughts and memories, or they've been perpetrated, they're going to experience maybe some issues with being in interpersonal relationships, right? Even if it's not necessarily an intimate relationship. There might be maybe difficulty with getting and keeping work, might be problem with parenting, maybe that sense of identity or that sense of self. And then because of the nature of sexual trauma, it can also lead to some spirituality issues and a crisis of faith.
And so next slide, please. Great, awesome. So we're going to do eligibility and benefits now, but leads us to our second poll question. What do you all think? Give you a few more seconds here.
We have a little more than half of the responses, and so far we got 75% true.
All right, looks like, well, we still got a couple. Remember, these are anonymous. No one's going to know what you said. All right, well, let's find out the answer, shall we? Next slide, please. So, yes, free care is provided for all medical and mental health conditions related to MST. So, a veteran never has to be service connected for them to receive that free MST related care. It is completely independent of VBA disability claims process, and VBA is Veterans Benefits Administration. And a veteran never needed to have reported an MST event at the time or have any other documentation. As I said earlier, we have a screen. We screen all veterans here at the VA, and with a positive screen, that opens the door for that free MST related care. Sometimes this is the only way that people are receiving care here at the VA. There are no length of service or income requirements when they have MST related care. And one of the changes recently is MST survivors with an other than honorable discharge are now immediately eligible for MST related medical and mental health care. So these folks are no longer limited to just mental health care, and this is a really recent change. The character of the discharge adjudication is still required, so working on upgrading their DD 214, but other than honorable MST survivors can still continue receiving the full range of MST related health care and mental health care unless they are found to have a dishonorable discharge for all VA purposes, which is 12C. So we really strive here to make sure at the VA that no one ever assumes that someone isn't eligible for MST related care. And that's actually part of mine and Audrey's roles, is to make sure that we're helping people navigate the system here related to MST related care. MST related care is also done at vet centers, which is a wonderful alternative, you know, for veterans, and an MST disclosure and a DD 214 is enough for them to receive care there. And when we talk about care, we're talking about outpatient, inpatient, medications, and there are no co-payments for our folks who have MST related care. Next screen, please. So as I said earlier, we were talking about the screen for MST. It's a 2-question. And what we have found through research is that VA, that people actually are more likely to disclose when they are asked universal screens. So we make sure that everyone, hopefully at the first touch, doesn't always happen. If somebody shows up at the ER and is in crisis or having some other medical issue that it's not appropriate to screen, we don't. But oftentimes their first touch at a VA is through primary care. And so we really work with all of our personnel here to know how to screen for MST. And studies have consistently shown that most sexual trauma survivors favor these routine screens because they're more likely to answer the question if asked the question, right? So in screening for MST, we use trauma-informed care principles, and we really help our clinical staff understand the awareness and barriers to a disclosure. So we think about shame and self-blame, right? Fear of becoming emotionally overwhelmed. I can't tell you how many times I've had people say, you know, I'm afraid if I talk about this, I'm gonna start crying and it's never gonna stop. There still is a strong societal stigma associated with sexual trauma, especially for men and especially for our warrior culture, right? Interestingly, the Uniform Military Code of Justice defined rape as something that only happens to females up until 1992. A lot of people that I see in my office are 50, 60, 70 years old. So think about what that might add to making a disclosure of military sexual trauma. And if they did, for example, report while they were in the service, then, and they didn't get a supportive response, that can also be a barrier, because oftentimes our service members see the VA as an extension of the military. So these are all the things that we help train our staff to know how to navigate these. Next slide, please. And I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague, sorry, Audrey, so that she can tell you about treatment and resources.
Yes, so treatment and resources. So Julie did an amazing job talking about the screening for MST. So what's the next step? So keep in mind that not everybody who has survived military sexual trauma is going to need or be interested in treatment for anything related to MST. If we have individuals who are, though, we have a process for that. So luckily, every VA medical center has providers who are knowledgeable about MST. Providers here have to complete a mandatory training and know kind of which direction to send people if they are interested in treatment, or if they are therapists, know how to work with that person. So we have everything from psychotherapy, we have psychiatry, individuals and groups. We have specialty services, including PTSD clinic, our substance abuse clinic, and also homelessness, which is another issue that we commonly see with individuals who have survived MST, right? So at our VA medical centers, we all offer evidence-based psychotherapy, which means we're doing treatments that are shown to be effective and work. So, and then like Julie mentioned, we also have our vet centers who are also specially trained in working with survivors of MST. And then the next slide, yes, so we have here, this is very exciting. This was just released within the past few months. Some of you may have already heard of it. So Beyond MST is a new app that we have. It's available on both Android and on Apple phones. And it contains over 30 different tools to help people, to help survivors of MST cope with different challenges, manage symptoms, improve quality of life, and find hope. I've installed it on my own phone, and even for me as a provider, I'm finding it very helpful just for dealing with day-to-day stress, but then also finding it more helpful to know what I'm recommending to people whenever I'm working with veterans, and suggest that they download this. And then the next slide, please. So this is our shameless plug. So if, as many of you may know, April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month with the VA. And we have organized a virtual 5K. So it's not too late. I am aware it's already 4:22, but this isn't something that has to be done in one day. If you are interested, please come and sign up for our virtual 5K. You can do it in any form of movement. You can walk, you can bike, whatever you'd like. And just to support and show your support and awareness of military sexual trauma and sexual assaults. So we do have a slide here. So we will be accepting questions over in the chat box. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kim Kordik from the Phoenix Regional Office. And if you have any questions regarding anything that we've already discussed, feel free to shoot us a message in the chat, and Julie and I will be looking at that while Kim is presenting on the VBA.
Thank you, ladies. Let me see about getting my screen shared. Give me one moment, please. Ignacio, can everybody see that?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so my name is Kim Kordik, and I'm the MST coordinator for the Phoenix Regional Office. A lot of the information that I'm going to be sharing is going to be on one level a little bit overlapping with the hospital ladies, but I will go over them briefly as well. And for those of you that are wondering what the difference between us is, obviously the ladies at the hospital, they work with mental health, physical health, things of that nature, while at the regional office level, people like myself are working with veterans to get service connection and or other benefits related to their active duty military service, to include military sexual trauma. So part of that we'll go over will be our VA organizational structure. What is military sexual trauma, which the hospital ladies have already gone over. However, for those of you that are just joining, I'll briefly touch on that as well. What we are looking at the regional office with regards to a marker, types of evidence, the claim process, MST coordinator information, and obviously at the end, we'll also touch upon questions and answers that I can hopefully assist you with. So the VA is three-pronged. It encompasses the VBA, which I represent, which is disabilities, education, vocation, home loans, etc., life insurance. We have the hospital administration for medical treatment, mental health and treatment, and then obviously the cemetery. So briefly, we can go over what the ladies already went over, which is 38 US Code Section 1720D, which is just the legal requirement and authority that the VA, Department of Veterans Affairs, has with regards to what we are showing as definition for sexual harassment, sexual, anything of a sexual nature, what could include rape, harassment, on active duty for training, and inactive duty for training. So many people don't realize that it doesn't have to just be on active duty. It could be during your period of active duty for training as well as your inactive duty for training period. As the ladies explained, we both deal with both men and women who have had a sexual trauma while in the military. We have here at the regional office both male and female MST coordinators for whatever your preference or convenience is. If you prefer to speak with a male and a female responds to, say, an email or a phone call, you can always let that person know that you're more comfortable speaking with somebody of the opposite sex. So don't ever feel like you have to talk to that person, because we have both male and female. Obviously, the regional office has the contact information as well for our VA hospital system MST coordinators. So sometimes the first stop is, say, my office, and we are happy to provide you with the contact information for Audrey and Julie as well. Okay, so one of the things that I want to talk about that the regional office often deals with when considering service connection for an MST related event is markers. And markers are very important to your claim, because oftentimes you experience a sexual assault, sexual harassment, sexual battery, domestic violence, and that person may be in your chain of command and you're not going to tell anyone. And that's okay. We also at the regional office have trained personnel that develop the claims and rate the claims and make decisions on the claims relating to military sexual trauma. And so they are trained to search out in your active duty records, whether it be your personnel records, outside duty records, and or service treatment records, for markers, which are events by themselves may have no specific relationship to the traumatic event, but take on a different meaning when viewed in light or within the context of the circumstances related to a military sexual trauma. And sometimes those markers are often identified as behavioral changes, which we'll also go over. So evidence that may be a marker or trauma include, but are never limited to, increased use or abuse of leave without apparent reason. it could be due to family obligations, family sickness. It could be increased visits to the counseling center, to the sick call, medical providers on base. It could be episodes that are actually in your service treatment records that show complaints of depression, panic, anxiety, with maybe no diagnosis while you're in service, but you went in and talked to somebody and said, I'm just feeling anxious, but you decided, against stating that a military sexual trauma took place. In those instances, we're identifying that as a marker in your service treatment records. So other ideas of potential markers would be pregnancy tests, STD tests, HIV tests that are, in and around the time that you have identified to us at the regional office as the time frame in which a stressful event took place. Other markers of trauma are related to changes in your occupational series, your MOS, without justification. Just one day you decided to ask for a change in location and duty station, changes in your performance evaluation. And that could also be with regards to changes in performance evaluations. That could be the difference between you being a better service member in terms of your evaluation grades, or it could mean that you have a drop. It doesn't have to necessarily be that your performance dropped. It could be that an event took place and, one of your coping mechanisms was to just try and put it out of your mind, and you became, you were doing awesome in your performance evaluation. So we're looking at a fluctuation in those performance evaluations of up or down, increase in prescription medication use, over-the-counter medications, as well as alcohol and drug abuse use and or counseling. We also have other markers that we look for in your personnel records, sometimes that you guys as active duty members don't even realize got put into your record. So some of these things that I'm mentioning to you are things that we're looking for that you may not even know are there, and or may jog your memory when you're telling us about what happened to you, that these things occurred and you remember that these occurred, and just telling us that those things occurred help us kind of pinpoint those things in your record. But we're also looking for disregard for military or civilian authority, obsessive behavior such as overeating and undereating, fluctuations in weight that are noted in your service treatment records at visits to the healthcare professionals on base, unexplained economic or social behavior changes. Sometimes we'll see, counseling because there's a debt that, happened, or social behavioral changes, treatment for physical injuries around the time, but not reported as a result of the trauma. These are also common where you're assaulted and other injuries occur at that same time. It's helpful if you tell us that, because while we may not see in your treatment records that a rape or an assault took place, but that you hurt your back during that event, but we see that you went to sick call because of your back, we can use that as a marker. We'll also use the breakup of the primary relationship as well. In personal assault claims, the stressor is non-combat related. In other words, it's not due to, combat in a combat zone. Your lay statement alone is not enough, though. I want to point that out. Your statement, and even though the VA is not saying that we don't believe you, the VA requires by law that we have support and of occurrence of the stressor, which is why the markers are very important. So we take your lay testimony, which is essentially your statement of what happened. And we try to go back and round it out with what we can find as a marker in your service treatment records and your personnel records. So it's very important that we're able to find a marker in your record that enable us to, at that point, send you for an exam and let the examiners review that evidence that we have labeled as a marker, because it has to be corroborated by something in the evidence. Credible supporting evidence does not mean that the evidence proves that the incident occurred. Again, we have to provide the examiners at the VMAC or the contract examiners with a marker that we see as marker based on your statement, and then it's up to the examiner to decide whether or not that is a marker that contributes to their diagnosis. We understand as well at the regional office that this is an extremely personal and sensitive issue for you. We're not asking you to relive everything. However, in order for us to be able to go through your records, we do have to have some semblance of information as to what happened with a time frame that it happened, so that we are then able to go through your service treatment records and your personnel file to find the markers that we need in the event that you did not, provide a statement to your chain of command or anybody within the military that a rape or an assault happened. Many events are not officially reported, so please don't worry about that. If we are able to find a marker for you, we will find a marker for you. Circumstantial or indirect evidence. There's going to be a lot of technical stuff that we're looking for here, and I'm going to try and just make sure that I'm hitting the high points on these. My explanation of things is going to primarily focus, as you can tell so far, on the fact that somebody that didn't report a rape, a harassment, an assault of any nature that we can see in their service treatment records. At that point, if we already see that happened in your service treatment records, then the markers and such don't play as big a role in any of this, because we have a direct evidence within your active duty records to refer you to an exam. So primarily what I'm discussing today has to do with those veterans that chose not to identify or make a statement, which is very, very common. So please don't worry about that. You're in good company when it comes to that statement, because not everybody, in fact, most people that I work with didn't tell anybody that this happened. So what I'm here to help with is trying to find the circumstantials and indirect evidence and marker evidence in your service treatment records that can rise to the level of us referring you to an exam at the hospital or the contract examiners. Isolated events by themselves have no specific relationship to the traumatic event. And that goes back to the markers. So you can have been raped or assaulted and never told anyone, but have a whole bunch of other things happen after that that can amount to what we view as a marker. And at that point, we can refer you for an exam. But if you went to a rape crisis center or a center for domestic abuse, if you went to an outside the base counseling facility or health clinic, or told family members or roommates, that would be very helpful information for us to have in regards to a piece of the evidence that we can use as a marker that gets you to the hospital for an exam. If you told civilian military police, or I'm sorry, civilian police, if you had outside care, you would want to tell us. If you told a chaplain, a lot of this is overlapping because the way the definition works at the regional office. So if it sounds redundant, it probably is, but I still want to go over it because it is important that you understand that there are lots of different ways that we can help you prove that something happened without you actually having it shown in your service treatment records. Another big one is personal diaries or journals. I know a lot of people out there like to keep journals, diaries, letters to their parents, letters to their significant others. And sometimes those people kept those letters. And those can actually be considered a buddy statement that we can take as a marker. If you abused your leave without apparent reason, if you had changes in your performance evaluations, I know we've gone over this before. If you had treatment without specific diagnoses, those can be markers. We've gone over this, substance abuse, a decline or increase in your work performance, lay statements from people that knew you at the time that this happened. Other sources of information that we can get and use on your behalf would be from hospitals, mental health, personnel file, which I've gone over, service treatment records, NCIS and Psy.D. If you actually did make a comment to somebody in your chain of command and there was an investigation, sometimes that doesn't always make it into your personnel file. And the reason for that is because once NCIS and Psy.D get involved, they will keep those records on file with them at your service, with your particular service. So we can make a request for those investigative reports. If you kept those investigative reports, that would be hugely helpful to us, that you provide them to us. Anything that you can provide to us that would show any of these suggestions or examples of markers or circumstantial evidence would be greatly helpful to us. We're going to go through your file. We're going to look for as many markers as we possibly can based on your statement and the time frame in which the stressor event took place. Oftentimes I have veterans that will say, you know, Kim, I cannot remember when this happened. And then I have veterans that will say, I know the exact day, I know the minute, I know the second. It doesn't matter. If you can provide me with at least a 2-month window as to an event, if you cannot remember, give us 2 months. If you can give us a 2-month window, and I like to use, you know, the seasons. You know, sometimes if you can't remember, you've blocked it out, you don't want to remember, all understandable. But if we can have something like, I know it was in the summer, or I know it was humid, or I know it was raining outside, those, you know, kinds of timeframes can be very helpful for us while looking through your records. Other statements, if you have them from family members and roommates, clergy, friends, diary entries, things like that, that you can make a copy of, or that someone can send us a letter from. Sometimes those can be very helpful, especially for people that served with you, that you told, like friends, while you were in the military. So I do want to touch upon briefly the DOD, and we went over NCIS and Psy.D briefly. When you do provide a statement, there is a restricted and an unrestricted report when you send those records, not send those records, but identify that a stressor occurred that are investigated. And those records we can get, we would just need your permission. You would have to sign a form that gives us a consent and authorization form that we can go out to your service department and request the unrestricted and or restricted reports. Sometimes these will make it into your personnel file, sometimes they won't. So it's important that if you did go and report this to an investigative division, that you give us that information, and so we can go and get that on your behalf.
Hey, Kim, sorry to interrupt real quick, but just want to let you know that we have about 6 minutes left on the session. And that because we have other breakout sessions after this, we can't really go over the time.
Okay, I will just end this with
Q&A.
I'll just end this then right now with the forms that we need. Most importantly, we need the 526EZ form. We need the 0781A, which is the statement in support of claim for PTSD, combat, or personal trauma. The reason for this is it will give you the outline of the month, a date that you can provide to us, a statement of what happened. If you had outside medical treatment besides the VA medical centers, if you wanted us to go get that for you for treatment that you have had, you can sign the consent authorization and consent to release information form. So that's all I have for you then.
Awesome.
So do we have time, Ignacio, just to open it up for a few questions if anyone has anything they didn't want to type in the chat?
Of course. I believe that the session is, everybody's muted, so we do need, if you have a question, please post it in the chat and we'll read it and have these amazing ladies right here answer the questions for you.
Thank you.
We could also allow people to unmute themselves if you want. It's up to you. Would you like them to do that at this point if they have a quick question?
I think it would be quicker.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I will change
Thank you.
that for you. So now they can unmute themselves if they'd like to ask a question.
And it looks like we just had a comment over that from Jennifer, who said that she can assist with filing any claims related to MST. So thank you, Jennifer, for offering that information. I also copy and pasted our contact information over in the chat, and that should be in the PowerPoint presentations as well that Ignacio was kind enough to share. So let's see, who is the MST coordinator in Los Angeles? I know that we have access to a list. I'm not sure if that is available to the public. So Gail, if you don't mind, let me try to look that up real quick for you while.
It is, you can go to Google MST coordinators at the regional office. It should come up with a link and you can search by state. And then it will provide you with that MST's email to any of the regional offices.
Is that just for a regional? Oh.
I think there's one for VMACs as well. I have all three of your guys' contact information personally, but I don't ever search it out. So because I already have it, but I do know that the VBA, all of them are listed online on va.gov.
Yeah, and you can also go to the website of each facility and we're listed on there as well.
Right, for va.gov, you can, in the search bar at the top, you can say MST coordinators and it will come up with a list by state.
Thank you, Jennifer.
There you go.
And if you have any trouble finding that, you can either reach out to myself or Audrey and we'd be happy to assist you with that as well.
Absolutely.
And then there was a question from Bobby or a statement that we didn't have a chance to get to about vet centers. Was it a statement or a question? And Bobby, if you're still on.
Hi, this is Bobby. I'm sorry. Yes, it was a statement. A lot of our veterans are having trouble finding a counselor for the services related to MST. So that's why I needed a contact information for any type of counseling that they can possibly receive from Northern Arizona.
So they can reach out to, are they enrolled at the Navajix VA, do you know?
Not to my knowledge. Most of our veterans here on Navajo Nation are not per se enrolled with VA. We do encourage it and we do our best to help them enroll with VA, but I know getting them there and the rural addressing of us is one of their barriers, as well as transportation. So we do what we can here to get them enrolled with VA.
Sure, and so so I'm located at the Navajix VA. So yes, they have to be enrolled to receive any type of services. So that is the first step, unless they want to go through the vet center program. But it sounds like maybe there's been a little difficulty there, if I'm understanding you correctly. So yes, once they're enrolled, we're doing a lot of work via VVC, which is very similar to what we're doing on Zoom here. We also have a PTSD counselor that is stationed up at Chinley, Mark Godwin, who does a lot of work with MST survivors up there as well. So we are aware that that is a population that's very deserving and there's been some difficulties, but I would say the first step is getting them enrolled. You can certainly give out my contact information. I'm certainly happy to help them navigate the system and try to find the best services possible for them.
Awesome. May I also have Mr. Godwin's contact information as well?
I can get that to you. I don't have it, readily available, but if you want to give me yours, I can have him reach out to you. He's been in between Albuquerque and Chinle, just depending on like what's going on. So I think he just got back there, but I don't have a direct, well, let me see if I do have a direct line for him. Hold on
I
one
want
second.
to make sure everyone gets to their next breakout session on time.
sorry, thank
So yeah, no, so if any of you have any questions specific to either Northern Arizona or Phoenix or for VBA, please feel free to reach out to us. We have our contact information over there. We'd be more than happy to help you out.
Yeah, and Bobby, and if you want to do that, just reach out to me here at Navigix. You and I can work together.
Will do. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
Best contact for me is email, simply because regional office still isn't back into the office full time. And so that phone number that you listed for me doesn't always work because it goes to a landline.
Good to know. Okay.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you very much. This session was honestly one of the most informative and engaged that we've had. It's honestly a pleasure to have helped you and have heard all this information.
Thank you for your help, Ignacio.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
of
Ignacio.
course.